Welcome, dear listener, to a journey into the heart of a darkness that has captivated and terrified. For over a century, tonight we delve into the shadowy alleys and gaslit streets of Victorian London to unravel the enduring enigma of Jack the Ripper. Find comfort in the quiet of your own space as we transport you back to the year 1888, a time when fear itself walked the streets of Whitechapel. Our story begins not in the grand boulevards of Westminster or the bustling markets of Covent Garden, but in the gritty, impoverished East End of London, a district known as Whitechapel. Imagine for a moment a labyrinth of narrow lanes, overflowing tenements, and overcrowded lodging houses. The air was thick with the smells of coal smoke, poverty, and human struggle. This was a world apart from the opulence of the West End, a stark contrast that defined Victorian society. In 1888, London was the largest city in the world, a sprawling metropolis of over 5 million souls. It was an era of unprecedented industrial growth and technological marvels, but beneath the veneer of progress festered immense social inequality. For every grand palace and magnificent institution, there were countless slums, where families crammed into single rooms, where sanitation was primitive, and where hope often felt like a forgotten luxury. Whitechapel epitomized this stark reality. It was a dumping ground for the poor, the destitute, the desperate. For many, earning a living was a daily battle. Men struggled to find work in the docks or factories, often resorting to casual labor that offered little security. Women faced even greater challenges, with few options for employment beyond grueling factory work, domestic service, or needlework. Many found themselves on the streets, turning to prostitution as a last resort, to pay for a bed in a doss house, piece of bread, or simply to escape starvation. These women were not living glamorous lives, but lives of utter desperation. Each night a gamble against the odds. The lodging houses were often grim affairs. A doss for the night, a shared bed, or even just a space on the floor cost a few pence. These were places of fleeting shelter, where anonymity was both a shield and a curse. Here the vulnerable mingled, their cries of poverty echoing through thin walls. It was in this desperate landscape that the shadows began to lengthen. The police force of London, the Metropolitan Police, or bobbies as they were affectionately known, were still relatively new, a presence in the streets, but often overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the city's underbelly. Their methods were rudimentary. By today's standards, fingerprinting was unknown, DNA analysis a distant dream. Investigations relied heavily on witness testimony, informant networks, and painstaking footwork. In the dense anonymity of Whitechapel, catching a perpetrator was akin to finding a needle in a haystack, especially one who moved with such chilling stealth. Into this volatile mix of desperation, neglect, and simmering discontent, a new element began to stir, an undercurrent of fear. A chilling whispers that turned gaslit shadows into monstrous figures. The summer of 1888 was a period of oppressive heat, a heat that seemed to magnify the misery of the East End. And then, the whispers began to take form, a new kind of predator, one who stalked the night with a terrifying purpose. Before the name Jack the Ripper became infamous, before the world knew the terror of Whitechapel's autumn of blood, there were already unsettling incidents. The police and press were accustomed to the everyday violence of the slums, the drunken brawls, the domestic disputes, the occasional murder that would shock for a day and then fade into the grim statistics of the East End. But what was coming was different. It was systematic, it was chillingly precise, and it would forever alter the perception of urban crime. The air in Whitechapel grew heavy, not just with the smoke from countless chimneys, but with an unspoken dread. As dusk fell, a different kind of darkness descended, a darkness that lurked not just in the alleys, but in the very hearts of the people. They felt it instinctively, a chilling premonition of the horrors that were about to unfold. And with each passing day, the shadow grew longer, the whispers louder, the fear more palpable. The stage was set for a nightmare that would become legend. Our journey into the core of the mystery begins, not with the canonical 5 victims, but with an earlier brutal killing, one often considered by many reaperologists to be the first victim of the Whitechapel murderer. Her name was Martha Tabram. She was 39 years old, a mother of 2 grown sons. Like so many in Whitechapel, she was an unfortunate, a woman who struggled with drink and resorted to prostitution to survive. Her life was hard, her days a constant grind against poverty. On the night of August 6, 1888, Martha was seen drinking with friends in the East End pubs. She left with a soldier or someone dressed as one and walked into the darkness of George Yard Buildings, a densely packed tenement block. At approximately 4:50 a.m. on August 7th, Martha's body was discovered, lying on a landing of the building's staircase. The scene was gruesome. She had been stabbed 39 times, mostly in the throat, chest, and abdomen. The sheer number of wounds, the frenzied nature of the attack, set it apart from typical street violence. It was personal, it was furious, but critically, there was no extensive mutilation of the abdomen, no precise removal of organs. Features that would later become the Ripper's terrifying signature. This lack of signature meant that at the time, her murder was viewed as an isolated tragedy, a particularly savage killing, but not yet connected to a burgeoning reign of terror. Yet many now believe this was the Ripper's first bloody lesson. Just 3 weeks later, the true horror of Whitechapel began to announce itself. The first canonical victim, Marian Nichols, known as Polly, was 43 years old. Her life too was marked by hardship, a broken marriage, alcoholism, and a constant struggle to find a bed. On the night of August 31st, she was turned away from a lodging house for lack of money. She told the deputy she would earn her DOS money on the street. At around 3:40 a.m. on August 31st, 1888, her brutally mutilated body was discovered by a carman named Charles Cross on Bucks Row, later renamed Durward Street in Whitechapel. She lay near a gateway to a stable yard. The scene was horrifying. Her throat had been deeply cut twice, almost severing her head. But what truly set this apart was the abdominal mutilation. Her abdomen had been ripped open and roughly disemboweled. This was not a frenzied attack like Martha Tabram's. This was precise. This was surgical, and it signaled the arrival of a new and terrifying kind of killer. The police were immediately on the scene, baffled and disturbed. Dr. Henry Llewellyn, the local police surgeon, was horrified by the nature of the wounds. This was beyond the usual street violence. The press quickly picked up the story, fueling a growing sense of unease. The term leather apron, a local gang leader, became an early suspect in the public mind. But the true killer remained a shadow. Just a little over a week later, the chilling pattern continued, solidifying the terrifying presence of a serial killer. Annie Chapman, known as Dark Annie, was 47 years old. Like Polly Nichols, she was an unfortunate, suffering from alcoholism and struggling to pay for her lodging. On the night of September 7th, she was turned away from her DOS house for owing a few pence. Her last known words were a desperate plea to earn money on the street. At around 6 a.m. on September 8th, Annie's body was discovered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields. The scene was even more gruesome than Polly's. Her throat was deeply cut. Her abdomen was completely laid open. Her intestines pulled out and laid over her shoulder. Even more chillingly, her uterus and part of her bladder had been removed. This was a killer with a grim fascination with human anatomy. The precision and the removal of organs marked a terrifying escalation. The discovery sent a wave of terror through Whitechapel. This was undeniably the same hand. The methods, the mutilation, the targeting of vulnerable women. The public outcry was immense. Panic began to spread through the East End. People started locking their doors earlier. Women feared walking alone. The police were under enormous pressure, their rudimentary methods proving inadequate against such a cunning and brutal foe. The killer seemed to vanish into thin air after each crime, leaving behind only horror and unanswered questions. The name Jack the Ripper had not yet been coined, but the legend had truly begun. The autumn of 1888 was just getting started, and London was about to descend into a nightmare that would haunt it for generations. The night of September 30th, 1888 became etched in history as the double event, a night of unimaginable terror that truly cemented the Ripper's legend and horrified the world. The killer struck twice within hours, claiming to more victims with chilling efficiency and brutality. Our first victim of this horrific night was Elizabeth Stride, known as Long Liz. She was 45 years old, originally from Sweden. Like the others, her life was one of poverty and struggle, a street walker who occasionally found refuge in common lodging houses. On this fateful night, she was seen talking to a man near Berner Street. At approximately 1 a.m. on September 30th, Elizabeth's body was discovered by Louis Diemschutz, a Jewish cart driver in Dutfield's yard off Berner Street. She lay dead, her throat deeply cut. However, crucially, there was no abdominal mutilation. This led to immediate speculation. Had the killer been interrupted? Had he been startled by Diemschutz's cart entering the yard? It seemed the Ripper's grisly work was unfinished. The police were alerted, and the scene quickly became a hub of frantic activity. The realization that the killer was still out there, possibly lurking nearby, sent shivers down the spines of the investigating officers. The interruption at Berner Street meant the killer was desperate to complete his ritual, and he would soon find another victim. Less than an hour after the discovery of Liz Stride's body, and less than a mile away, the killer struck again with unparalleled savagery. This time his victim was Catherine Eddowes, known as Kate Conway or Kate Kelly. She was 46 years old, a robust Irish woman who made her living on the streets. She had been arrested earlier that night for drunkenness and released from Bishopsgate Police Station at 1 a.m. Just as Liz Stride's body was being discovered, she walked into the night, perhaps heading towards her lodging house or to find another client. At 1:45 a.m., Police Constable Edward Watkins discovered Catherine Eddowes' body in Mitre Square, a secluded spot in the heart of the city of London. The scene was appalling. Her throat was deeply cut. Her face was severely mutilated, her nose sliced, her eyelids cut, and a V-shaped cut on her cheek. But the abdominal mutilation was the most horrific. Her entire lower abdomen was laid open, her intestines pulled out and thrown over her shoulder. Even more horrifying, her left kidney and part of her uterus had been precisely removed and taken by the killer. The precision of the removals indicated not a madman's rage, but a chilling surgical skill. The discovery sent shockwaves through not just Whitechapel, but the entire nation. A double murder within an hour. A killer who had been interrupted at one scene, only to immediately find another victim and complete his grotesque ritual. This was unprecedented. This was terrifying. The removal of organs. The surgical precision suggested a killer with medical or butchering knowledge. The police were in utter disarray. The Metropolitan Police, the City of London Police, the public vigilantes, all were baffled. The perpetrator seemed to melt into the Victorian fog after each strike. As dawn broke on September 30th, London awoke to a nightmare. The fear was no longer a whisper, it was a scream. She was arguably the most independent, living in her own single room at 13 Miller's Court off Dorset Street, Spitalfields, a small and squalid abode, but one she considered her home. Unlike the other victims, who were often found outside, Mary Jane Kelly was murdered in her bed. A chilling invasion of privacy. She was arguably the most independent, living in her own single room at 13 Miller's Court off Dorset Street, Spitalfields, a small and squalid abode, but one she considered her home. Unlike the other victims, who were often found outside, Mary Jane Kelly was murdered in her bed. A chilling invasion of privacy. On the morning of November 9th, her landlord John McCarthy sent his assistant to collect overdue rent. What they found inside room 13 was a scene of such unimaginable horror that it drove hardened police officers to retch. Mary Jane Kelly's body was savagely mutilated. Beyond recognition, her face was disfigured, her internal organs removed and placed on a table beside her bed. Her heart was missing. The walls and ceiling were splattered with blood. It was the most extensive and grotesque mutilation of all the Ripper's victims, indicating a killer who had spent considerable time in the room undisturbed. This final atrocity stunned London. The sheer barbarity of Mary Jane Kelly's death suggested a level of depravity previously unseen. The killer had operated with impunity for hours within her private room. The discovery intensified the public's demands for justice and their fear. The police were more desperate than ever. But the killer had once again vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of blood and an unyielding mystery. The reign of terror had reached its peak, and then it abruptly stopped. The murders ceased as mysteriously as they began, but the shadow of Jack the Ripper would forever hang over London. In the autumn of 1888, the Metropolitan Police Force found itself facing an unprecedented challenge. The Jack the Ripper murders were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Serial killings as we understand them today were an unknown concept. The police were accustomed to solving crimes through confession or direct witness testimony. The Ripper left no witnesses, no clear motive, and a trail of baffling brutality. The investigation was led by Chief Inspector Frederick Aberline, a seasoned detective from Scotland Yard known for his meticulousness and dedication. He was joined by Inspector Henry Moore and supervised by Chief Inspector Donald Swanson. Their task was daunting. The challenges they faced were immense. Whitechapel was a densely populated labyrinth where anonymity was easy. The impoverished residents often distrusted the authorities, fearing false accusations, or simply too desperate to risk involvement. Alcoholism was rampant, affecting witness reliability. There were no modern forensic techniques. Fingerprinting was still years away from being adopted as routine evidence. DNA analysis a century in the future. The police relied on simple observation, basic photography, and the painstaking collection of physical evidence from the scenes, which was often contaminated or overlooked. The sheer volume of false leads and dubious confessions was overwhelming. Countless letters claiming to be from the killer flooded police stations, each one needing investigation. Every suspicious individual in Whitechapel was questioned, their movements scrutinized. Over 2,000 lodging house residents were interviewed. More than 80 detectives were assigned to the case, the largest manhunt of its time. Police methods were largely reactive. Officers walked their beats, hoping to stumble upon a crime or a suspect. Communication was slow. There was no centralized database of criminals. Information sharing between the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police responsible for Mitre Square was notoriously poor initially, adding to the confusion. The lack of any definitive pattern to the attacks beyond the victim profile also hindered them. The killer moved between districts, struck at varying times, and left little to no forensic trace. The victims themselves, being vulnerable prostitutes, often had no fixed abode, making it difficult to trace their movements or identify their associates. The horrific nature of the mutilations did provide some clues. The precision of the cuts and organ removals led investigators to believe the killer possessed some form of anatomical knowledge, perhaps a butcher, a doctor, or someone with surgical experience. Police surgeons provided detailed reports on the wounds, but the understanding of criminal psychology was virtually non-existent. There was no concept of profiling a serial killer in the way we do today. Despite the monumental efforts and dedicated work of officers like Aberline, the killer always remained one step ahead. He was a ghost in the gaslight, a phantom slipping through the cracks of a sprawling city. The pressure from the public and the press mounted with each new discovery, leading to desperate measures and increasing frustration. Within Scotland Yard, the investigation into the Jack the Ripper murders became a defining moment for modern policing. It exposed the limitations of traditional methods against a new breed of criminal. It forced authorities to grapple with public hysteria, media sensationalism, and the challenges of crime in an increasingly anonymous urban landscape. Despite their tireless efforts, the officers found themselves battling not just a killer, but an elusive shadow that defied capture. And as the murders abruptly ceased, the police were left with an unsolved case, a chilling legacy that would haunt their institution for decades to come. As the grim body count rose in Whitechapel, another unsettling element emerged to fuel the public's terror. and shaped the enduring legend of Jack the Ripper, the infamous letters. These communications, purporting to be from the killer himself, transformed a local horror into a global sensation and added a sinister, almost theatrical dimension to the unfolding nightmare. The first and most famous of these was the Dear Boss letter, postmarked September 27, 1888. It arrived at the Central News Agency, written in red ink with a semi-literate, but chillingly confident tone. It read, "I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. The last job was a Bobby's job. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue. Can't use it, hope you'll like the next job. I am Jack the Ripper." This was the first time the name Jack the Ripper appeared. It was a name that would forever be synonymous with terror. Its immediate publication by the newspapers ignited a media frenzy. Was it authentic? Was it a hoax designed to capitalize on the public's fear? The police were divided, but felt compelled to investigate every lead. The name itself became a brand of terror, a chilling epithet that resonated across the globe. Just days later, after the double event on September 30th, another macabre missive arrived, this one even more disturbing. The Saucy Jackie postcard, postmarked October 1st, was also sent to the Central News Agency. It boasted about the 2 murders and the lack of time to finish the second victim. Then came the most grotesque of all, the From Hell letter, accompanied by a small cardboard box containing half a human kidney, was sent to George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. The letter claimed the other half had been fried and eaten by the sender. The authenticity of the letters remains a fiercely debated topic among ripperologists. Many believe they were the work of a sensationalist journalist seeking to boost newspaper sales. The police themselves were skeptical, with Chief Inspector Aberline reportedly dismissing them as hoaxes. However, the From Hell letter with its gruesome attachment was taken more seriously, leading to a police investigation into its origin. Regardless of their authenticity, these letters had a profound impact. The letters fueled an unprecedented level of public hysteria. Newspapers plastered the gruesome details across their front pages, selling millions of copies. The anonymity of the killer, coupled with his self-given moniker, created a terrifying phantom. Fear gripped London. Vigilance committees were formed by concerned citizens, attempting to patrol the streets and offer rewards for information. The poor Irish and Jewish communities of Whitechapel often became targets of suspicion and prejudice. As the public sought someone to blame, the media played a significant role in escalating the panic. Sensational headlines, lurid descriptions, and speculative theories ran wild. The Ripper was no longer just a killer. He was a boogeyman, a figure of folk horror haunting the very fabric of society. The letters, perhaps hoaxes, amplified this fear to a fever pitch, transforming a series of local murders into a global phenomenon. Over the past century and more, the question of Jack the Ripper's identity has spawned countless theories and an almost endless parade of suspects, from aristocrats to commoners, from doctors to butchers. Each has been scrutinized, his life dissected in an attempt to unmask the anonymous killer, yet the truth remains elusive. Let us explore some of the most prominent figures who have fallen under the shadow of suspicion. Visuals focus on a historical photograph of Montague John Druitt, one of the earliest, and for a time a favored suspect by Scotland Yard, was Montague John Druitt. He was a barrister, a seemingly respectable gentleman from a good family. His connection to the case stems from a police memorandum suggesting that the murders ceased around the time of his death by drowning in the Thames in December 1888. The official police theory at one point hinted that the killer had committed suicide. However, there was no direct evidence linking Druitt to any of the murders. His family later revealed a history of mental illness, but nothing concrete ever tied him to the brutal crimes. He remains a historical curiosity rather than a definitive answer. Another intriguing suspect is George Chapman, born Surin Kosowski. He was a Polish immigrant who arrived in London shortly before the Ripper murders. Interestingly, he later became a serial poisoner, known as the Borough Poisoner, who murdered 3 of his wives. Chief Inspector Aberline himself, Allegedly, believed Chapman was the Ripper. Chapman had medical training and a violent disposition towards women. However, the methods of poisoning are vastly different from the Ripper's knife work. While a dangerous man, his modus operandi doesn't quite fit the Ripper's grisly pattern. The painter Walter Sickert has been a popular suspect in various modern theories, most notably those proposing a royal conspiracy. Sickert was a prominent artist who lived in the Whitechapel area. At the time, proponents of this theory point to his macabre paintings, many depicting dark interiors and prostitutes, as well as his alleged fascination with the Ripper case. However, the evidence against him is largely circumstantial, based on interpretation of his art and later accounts. No direct link to the murders has ever been established. Beyond these specific individuals, the theories explode into a vast and often fanciful array. The royal conspiracy theory suggests the Ripper was a high-ranking member of the royal family, perhaps Prince Albert Victor, attempting to cover up an illegitimate child born to a prostitute, with murders designed to silence those who knew. This theory is largely dismissed by serious historians for lack of credible evidence, but continues to capture the popular imagination. There's even the intriguing notion of Jill the Ripper, suggesting a female killer, perhaps a midwife or abortionist, who could move anonymously among the women of Whitechapel. This theory attempts to explain the anatomical knowledge and the lack of a male suspect being caught. While a captivating idea, it too lacks concrete proof. The enduring fascination with Jack the Ripper is precisely due to this lack of closure. The endless list of suspects, each with their own compelling but ultimately unproven case, ensures the mystery lives on. For every new piece of supposed evidence, new doubts emerge. The Whitechapel killer remains a faceless shadow, his identity obscured by the passage of time, the limitations of Victorian policing, and perhaps a cunning beyond our grasp. The truth remains buried in the heart of that dark London autumn of 1888, a secret kept by the gaslight and the fog. As mysteriously as they began, the Jack the Ripper murders ceased. After the horror of Mary Jane Kelly's death on November 9, 1888, the mutilations stopped. No more bodies bearing the Ripper's signature wounds were found. The terror that had gripped London slowly began to subside, replaced by a lingering unease and a gnawing frustration for the unsolved crimes. Life in Whitechapel gradually returned to a semblance of normal. The lodging houses continued to teem. The streets remained bustling with vendors and workers, but the psychological scars of that autumn ran deep. For the police, it was a profound failure, an indelible stain on their record. They had faced a new kind of evil and had been unable to stop it. The Ripper murders had a significant impact on policing methods. The sheer scale of the investigation, the need for better communication between forces, and the recognition of the psychological dimensions of crime would eventually lead to reforms. It highlighted the need for more systematic detective work and the development of forensic science. It forced the authorities to confront the squalid living conditions of the East End. While not directly caused by the Ripper, his reign of terror drew undeniable attention to the plight of the poor and vulnerable women of Whitechapel. Charitable organizations saw an increase in support, and public awareness of social issues grew. Yet the greatest legacy of Jack the Ripper is his enduring fascination. The identity of the killer remains one of history's most compelling unsolved mysteries. Countless books, articles, documentaries, and films have been produced trying to piece together the puzzle. Tourists flock to Whitechapel to walk the very streets where the horrors unfolded. He has become a chilling archetype of the anonymous serial killer, a figure of pure dread who haunts the collective consciousness. Why does the Ripper continue to captivate us? Perhaps it is the perfect storm of ingredients. A brutal killer with a unique signature, a sprawling atmospheric Victorian setting, vulnerable victims, and an investigation that consistently failed to capture its quarry. The absence of a definitive answer allows for endless speculation, for each generation to project its own fears and theories onto the blank canvas of the unknown. The legend of Jack the Ripper serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of any society, regardless of its progress. It speaks to the vulnerability of the marginalized, the limitations of justice, and the enduring power of the unknown. It is a story not just about a killer, but about a city and a world grappling with its own shadows. And so the fog of London's past continues to swirl around the name Jack the Ripper, a specter from a bygone era. His identity remains a secret held by the ghosts of Whitechapel. We are left to ponder the nature of evil, the resilience of hope, and the mysteries that time simply refuses to yield. The hunt continues in the annals of history, forever captivating us with its haunting silence